Good morning, everybody. So today I kind of reflect on a technique I wasn't taught by anybody. I developed it myself because I was so caught up in my thinking. So when you're an obsessed thinker, you think about everything, even when you don't want to think. When I was a samanera, I had an insight. I had to stop thinking. So I tried to stop thinking just using willpower, but I couldn't sustain it. I could stop thinking through willpower, but eventually I lost the effort, the will to hold it. And you can't just live your life not thinking and stopping thinking all the time through an effort, through willpower, very much based on the ego, the sense of I've got to stop thinking. So in the meditations on space, I became interested in just meditating on space. So I would develop awareness around the space around the monks, like you sit in meditation in the Dhamma hall. And as I began to create personalities, this monk I like, this monk I don't like, I began to witness that was like personal reactions. When you get to know people, then if some you relate to better than others, then you give them personalities, you make judgments about them, and I could see that I was beginning to do that with the monks at Wat Pah Pong. When I first came there, they were all just monks to me, so I thought they were all, I gave them this kind of, they're meditators, they're really good, and I respect every single one of them. So the kind of initial beginning was, generous and kind of ignorant way of looking at a group of human beings. But I didn't have any personal views about any of them till a few months later, and then the liking, disliking, approving, disapproving, critical tendencies that I was so good at began to dominate. So I developed awareness. I used to sit in meditation sessions at Wat Pah Pong, and I look at the space around the monks, between the monks sitting in front of me. And so the form in space, space isn't good or bad, beautiful or ugly. It is, it's space. When you do a meditation, reflect on space, the insight you get is that it is spaciousness. So space has no limit or boundary. So we think this Dhamma hall is spacious. It's a very big, well-appointed meditation hall. It's spacious, but actually the whole monastery, is in space. Everything's in space. So space itself is it's here and now. Wherever you are, there's space. Whether you're in a cramped cell or on a mountaintop, space is always here and now. Breathing, you're breathing, anapanasati, inhaling, exhaling, it's always here and now. spaces here and now, your views and opinions change accordingly. Your moods, your emotional state changes all the time, and it's easy to just be caught up in emotional reactions to life. When you try to suppress the emotions, then you know, with the intellect, you try to stop feeling emotional, and that takes a lot of effort. So it's like suppressing emotion, fighting against, resisting the emotions that you're actually subject to in the present, here and now. And what you're doing as an ego is learning how to suppress them. So with the intellect doesn't feel anything. Intellect is just a function of language. So it's reasonable. We can, in most modern education is about reason and logic. So it has its advantages to develop a reasonable intellect, but it's still conditioned. And then we have to live in this, as I pointed out many times, the sensory experience that through the body, which isn't reasonable. It's not about your physical body. Your emotions are not reasonable. So we can judge, we think of people starting to cry and they say, here I'm getting emotional, and because reason-wise you don't want to get emotional in public or be seen crying or whatever, so you have developed intellectual abilities to distract yourself through various repressive, resistant techniques. So there's a lot of mental illness because of that, because when we learn to suppress things, then, that there are times, why do people go to pubs and so get drunk or take drugs? It's because then they don't have to put forth the effort of suppressing. They can say or feel, in various ways, enjoy the senses through drug addiction, sometimes through alcohol, through eating a lot of delicious food. These are ways of enjoying the sense world. But in meditation, in bhavana, we're investigating this, that our own personal tendencies, whether we've repressed a lot or we haven't. Some people are very emotional, cry very easily, are not afraid to display emotions in public, and others, those of us who are brought up in kind of Anglo-Saxon cultural traditions, we suppress. We suppress our feelings. We try to present a good face when we're in public situations. Stiff upper lip, be brave, man up, be strong, are the general advice that you get when you're growing up. So this is this I became apparent when I first ordained as a samanera, was how suppressed I was. When you're suddenly living all by yourself, you're living in a little kuti, and I didn't take anything to read, just the one book on the Four Noble Truths. And there was no electricity, no television, nobody spoke English. So all I was with myself for a year. I was there almost a year alone in this kuti, And during that time, I was trying to meditate by suppressing my feelings, by trying to get samadhi, concentrating as I've been taught to do on the breath, and following a very strict technique that I learned in Bangkok. So I really just being 24/7 with no distraction other than my own mind and body, then suddenly I began to, became aware of as emotions, unwanted emotions started arising. So it was, when I ordained as samaner, I wanted to be peaceful. I wanted to meditate and get into peaceful states, tranquilize, and have a peaceful time in this Kuti in Nong Khai province. And that's what I imagined I was there for. But that didn't happen at first. I just was caught up in repressed anger, resentment, fear, all these negative emotions that I resisted. I was 31 years old at the time, so that's a long time you're quite good at suppressing. But under the conditions that I was living under, in this kuti, all alone, then the suppressing techniques, the ability to distract myself, to read and watch television or smoke cigarettes or whatever, they weren't available. So all I could do was just sit and watch these emotions. So I became a watcher, a witness to repressed emotions, because the anger and resentment had nothing to do with the monastery I was in. They were very eager to help me. People were, gave me nice food to eat, and felt very supported by the monks and the nuns and lay people that came to that place. So I wasn't angry with them. It was just suddenly all this repressed anger started forcing itself into consciousness, where I'd spent over 30 years suppressing these emotions. So I just sat and watched. I didn't know what else to do. So after about 2 or 3 months of actually living in the hell realm, I woke up one morning and everything was beautiful and luminous. There was no anger, no resentment, no fear, and it was just a kind of luminous beauty about everything. So it was a kind of an experience of the pure conscious awareness, because I didn't create this. It's not through some kind of meditation technique that I acquired this state of luminosity, but it was when the anger, the resentment, the negativity had passed out. It was like I was locking these angry demons inside me. Every time they started to appear in consciousness, I'd suppress them. I'd close the prison door, slam it in their face, and try to forget about it. So, and then there was a lot of fear, because there's something very negative, dark and unwholesome lurking inside you, and you're afraid of it. So then, with this state of beauty, and luminosity, it's like spending the previous months just letting out all these unhappy, miserable creatures that I'd been so skilled in locking the door, slamming the door in their face whenever they showed their presence. But just by sitting and allowing them to open the door and leave is like mindfulness, awareness. You're suddenly letting out these suppressed things of the past, emotions, resentments, fears, and all I could do was sit with them and watch them. So it became, an insight of the true beauty of consciousness. But going back, when I ordained as a bhikkhu, living in a monastic community, and learning another language, training with strict Vinaya rules and all that, then you revert back to your old habit patterns. But I did have insight and confidence. And one thing was I just was just trying to stop thinking. As I've said before, it wasn't a very viable thing to do just by willpower. So just noticing the space between the monks, and meditating on space, observing, because space is here and now. And then I started reflecting on thinking, because it's words. Thinking is all language. And what's the space around a word? Because a word, just like the English personal pronoun I, just one letter. A personal pronoun which refers to yourself, and you watch yourself thinking I, and then there's nothing. And it's just a moment. I just takes a moment and it's gone. And yet the habit pattern is I am Ajahn Sumedho, or I am good or bad or true or false. Or then the whole personality manifests through I am good or bad or stupid or intelligent or right or wrong. But just personal pronoun in English, I really like that personal pronoun because it's just one letter in space or consciousness. So I deliberately think I, and then there was silence. I determined not to think am. Then I deliberately think am, and the space around that word, two-letter am verb, and I became interested in the space between the words. So I I decided to take a sentence, something that didn't arouse any emotions whatsoever. So I say, I am a human being, because that doesn't bring any kind of positive or negative reaction. It's kind of an uninteresting thing to think. And so because words trigger off emotions, I am a human being doesn't trigger off strong emotions, neutral. But I wasn't interested in the words themselves, but in the space. Before I deliberately, with deliberate intention, would think I'd notice the silence before I determined to think I. And then I intentionally think I, and then the silence that follows it is like this. So in the background of thought, there's silence. We can see it as consciousness. Consciousness is silent. And then intentionally think am, and then there's silence, and then there's a, and then human being. And after you intentionally thought human being, there's silence. So this developing awareness of silence as the background of everything, suddenly just by cultivating this, through this technique, I developed a very silent, natural silence. It's not a created silence. It's not like concentration practices, which you develop you have an object like the breath or a candle flame or a kasina or whatever, then you concentrate on that and you go into tranquil state. And that takes effort, and it's created, that kind of tranquility is created through concentration. But through recognizing the silence that's always here and now, it's not created, then that gives perspective on all the forms, on your personality views, on how you think, how you feel about life, because all these arise and cease in the silence that's ever present here and now, but unnoticed because we're always creating new things, distracting ourselves, eating or reading or watching television or talking on the phone or playing sports or doing something. There's always going to movies, ways of distracting oneself into interesting condition, phenomena. There's nothing wrong with that, but then we don't recognize the true nature. We spend our lifetime just distracting ourselves through thinking, through emotional habit patterns, through substances, without living, experiencing, or knowing the wisdom that is ever present in the silence. So the true nature of consciousness is silence. It's the silence before you think I. And that I manifests in the silence, but you're intentionally thinking. It's not just a habitual thinking, I am, it's intentional thinking. Because habitual thinking, then you don't notice the silence between the words. You think, I'm Ajahn Sumedho, this and that, and then through the English grammatical habits that you've developed in your life, you're always thinking in sentences, so the space between the words goes unnoticed. Or if we have like experiences where everything is silent, we feel very uncomfortable. Our egos don't appreciate silence. So when you're with somebody and there's a silence, then we want to fill that silence with conversation, gossip, complaints, whatever. So, we live in societies where we can just fill our lives with news, with gossip, because the silence, when you meet with somebody else and there's just silence, your ego gets very confused. It's embarrassing, or you think you've got to say something, or you feel very uncomfortable. So you can say, I've found myself saying rather stupid things just to break the silence. So this witnessing, the puto as a symbol of witnessing, with pu and to, two-syllable mantra. Before, we use, as I was yesterday talking about using it for anapanasati, inhaling on pu, exhaling on to, or when you're walking meditation, you right foot is pu and left step is to, your way of developing samadhi or concentration to stop the mind from wandering. So it's, it has its use as a samatha or concentration practice, because the thinking mind is so domineering, such a strong habit that at first, like even being mindful of one inhalation, I found impossible. The mind would just wander. And they'd give you instruction at the beginning of the inhalation, the middle, the end, beginning of the exhalation, the middle and the end. And so you're trying to notice the beginning of your inhalation, middle and end, and so you're busy concentrating on an inhalation and an exhalation. So carrying that through, you do eventually become quite tranquil, which is very pleasant. But in tranquility, there's not wisdom. It's a created state through concentrating, through sensory deprivation. So it's skillful means, it's good karma, so not to disparage it or not develop samatha concentration practices. They're all skillful means. But the wisdom arises through reflecting on the way it is, or Dhamma, to realize for yourself. Pure conscious awareness is not personal. It is the silence behind all the noise. It is blissful. When we use the English word bliss, I remember because bliss was a word used by people who get blissed out. I mean, they get really into some kind of altered state of extreme peacefulness through various techniques, through sensory deprivation, through narcotics and things like that can bliss you out. But then in terms of this silence that's natural, uncreated, and so I began using the word bliss with that, instead of the blissed out kind of definitions that I, had been using as a layperson. This must be what bliss really is. Silent awareness. It's peaceful, it's pure, it's here and now. So, the English language, or any language, Chinese language, Thai language, Pali, Sanskrit, suddenly I began to see they're all sankharas. Languages are sankharas. So the Pali Canon is all sankharas. So the idea of, it's good sankharas, they're good and bad sankharas, they have qualities. But wisdom doesn't come from sankharas. It's the natural conscious awareness that is available to us. Every human being, no matter how good or bad they might be, if they begin to realize this themselves. So like the Vipassana style of meditation or Zen style of meditation is this, using various pointers from the Tripitaka, from sacred texts, not grasping the sacred texts, but, looking to where they're pointing. So I oftentimes, as directional signs rather than belief systems or dogmatic positions one takes as Buddhist. So at Amaravati in England, it's north of London, and I have to go to London every few months, and so when you're on the road to London, you have signs saying London. Now the sign it says London, London, but that's not London. That's a pointer. So out of common sense, you ask the driver to point the car towards where the sign is pointing to. So if I just stay and grasp the London sign on the M25, it's rather stupid. It says London, but that's just a helpful sign giving you the direction. And so this Four Noble Truths is a sign like that. It's not the Dhamma in terms of ultimate reality. It's a sign pointing to ultimate reality. Or the problems with organized religions is that we tend to grasp the signs rather than go where they're pointing to. So like the Four Noble Truths is definitely directional sign. It's not a dogma. It's not metaphysical. It's not, it can be inspiring. There is suffering, there's the end of suffering, that can be inspiring. But then the whole attitude of investigation to find out this for yourself. You have to travel by yourself and realize the journey that you realize where Dhamma, ultimate reality, is here and now. It's not just a belief or a ceremony. Now I found the three characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta. There's a very wise kind of teaching they're not about words to grasp or believe in, but when we talk about anicca or impermanency, the whole thing is to find out for yourself. So you watch, when you intentionally think I, how long can you sustain a one-letter word? It arises and ceases very quickly. And yet it's important personal pronoun. We talk about I am and I should be and I want and I don't want, I like and I don't like, and so it's an important word in the English language. So it's not to be dismissed, but it can be used with wisdom to realize that it arises and ceases, and you realize this for yourself just through intentionally thinking I, and you're observing. And since I it comes and goes very quickly, what's left is silence. And so you're witnessing silence, silent witness is here and now. Than any other, whether you want to, whatever views or opinions, biases, prejudices, cultural biases, religious biases, they're all words created by human beings, they're conditioning. We tend to grasp these particular views or opinions that we get from our parents, from our society, from our education, about science, about religion. And so, we're caught in the samsara, or the cycles of birth and death, endlessly with this sense of holding on to cultural conditioning without using it. Cultural conditioning can be good or bad, but can be neither good nor bad, but it is conditioning, it's words, it's concepts. And that awareness is not a word or a concept. So when we talk about conscious awareness, it's here and now, and you're not conceiving it, or perceiving it, or creating it. It's completely natural, here and now reality. And as you develop the confidence in the space between the words, the silence that you begin to not be embarrassed by or want to fill with something, then silence becomes the real where you abide. It's peaceful. So, in terms of the mass media of this day and age, listening to the news on World Service, and BBC World Service, and all the views and opinions, political views and opinions, and views about war, views about Russia, views about Ukraine. I was listening this morning to a program about religious prejudices in Nigeria. So Nigeria is an African country where the southern part is mostly Christian, and the northern part is mostly Muslim. And so this man they were talking about was raised as a Muslim, and he became an atheist when he was young, and he was being persecuted because he wrote on the internet, on Facebook or whatever, one of those blogs about atheism, and it offended many Muslims. So there's very upheaval and fear around offending Muslims or Christians, and like atheists are like denying the existence of God or of Allah or of Muhammad or of Jesus, and this offends people whose faith is in these particular concepts. Because like religion is it's a strong conditioning. So an atheist believes there isn't any God, but he doesn't know for himself what God is. He just, because he doesn't believe the versions that he hears from the Muslims or the Christians, he no longer believes in that. Then I don't believe in God or Allah or anything like that. It's all rubbish. And then you're hurting many people's feelings. But atheism is also a belief. I believe there isn't any God. It's still a belief. Whether you believe there is or there isn't, a belief is a creation of out of human consciousness. So when religions like Islam or Christianity talk about God, they're oftentimes asking you to believe in some concept of God that they believe in. But what is God in reality, in terms of experience here and now? So being brought up as a Christian, I would ask myself, this is a three-letter word, G-O-D, it's from the German language, but yet Christians come and ask me, do you believe in God? And are you an atheist? Is Buddhism an atheistic religion? Are they just denying the existence of God or Jesus or Mohammed? They have various biased views about what Buddhists might be believing or thinking. It's oftentimes called a humanistic religion or psychology. So there's always a word trying to fix the word Buddhist into some category. Is it just humanism or atheism? It's not theism, it's not atheism. All these are words in English language which are, creations or sankharas. So when you begin to lose all your faith in trying to define life through sankharas, what's left is what I call God, or silence. It's compassionate, it's benevolent, it's loving kindness, it's peaceful, it's blissful, it's the natural state that we begin to realize through awareness. So, in Mohammed and Jesus, they must have had that same insight when they had some kind of spiritual realization, quite powerful. It can't be denied. So it's not denying the teaching, but how the history of Jesus or Mohammed tends to create them as objects of sense, as our superior beings or spiritual beings or some kind of being. Like the word God is always, you refer to God as He. Use a male pronoun to describe God. And then in the feminist movements of the 70s and 80s, the feminists were objecting to this. Why does God have to be a man, can be a woman? Which is an important question. Is God, male or female or neutral? Is it hermaphrodite or trans or you're trying to figure out the gender of God because separate beings have gender. So we think in terms of gender all the time. So like in Michelangelo's paintings, and that God is always very masculine. But then the investigation, Dhamma investigation, is not to just dismiss God or Jesus, but to what do these really mean? In terms of here and now, the reality of experience here and now. So then, like the history of Gautama the Buddha, a beautiful history it's repeated often enough in Buddhist temples. So it's inspiring how a prince would give up everything, a privileged life, a beautiful wife and child, to go off and some kind of spiritual search for reality. And so, it's like you've got the best of everything, then there's still something missing, and that's wisdom. So that initial impulse of Siddhartha was to be, recognizing that's good fortune, that's barami, that's good karma. Warning him, there are warning signs that just having endless privileges in society, you're still going to get old, get sick, and die. This is the nature of life, of the limitation of forms. So this investigation of anicca or impermanence, is something to really not just to use in daily life. Things are changing. And dukkha, anicca, dukkha, anatta, dukkha is beginning to become quite obvious. If you're a rabid thinker, then you're worried about the future. You have a lot of anxiety, self-consciousness. You feel self-conscious. You want to look good in front of others. That's why I'm wearing this hat, because I've got so I want to look good in front of you, because if I take off the hat, it doesn't look so good. And like that, you can observe, the suffering of just being caught in self-consciousness. Because you see yourself as this lonely form in a vast society that is critical. It's going to love you or hate you, like you or dislike you accordingly, and you don't know what everybody's thinking or feeling about me as a form sitting here. But if I become self-conscious sitting here, then I start wondering what they think of me, because that's about the self. And that's suffering, to see yourself in such limited ways, such confined ways of seeing yourself in relationship to others. You feel no connection. You feel isolated or averse. And those states of mind are, when you observe them by grasping those kind of habit patterns, you see the suffering, you're suffering. You create endless suffering for yourself about worrying what people think, what the neighbors think, what the husband thinks, what the wife thinks, what the in-laws think, and on like that. And what should, you sometimes, like myself, as personality, I'm quite shy. So I like to be alone where I don't have to be in a group because I feel quite safe all alone. And observing that, not criticizing it, but observing shyness, self-awareness is like this. Not saying I shouldn't feel this way or judging it, but recognizing it arises and ceases. So anicca, dukkha are quite obvious ways of investigating experience, and this, seeing, discovering what you really are. Are you really a shy person, or are you really self-conscious? Is that your true nature? Are you neurotic? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Are you socially skillful or unskillful? These are ways we question ourselves. We want to find out what we really are. So we go to astrologers and palmists and on and on like that, seeking to know our future and our past. So this is dukkha, anicca, dukkha, anatta was the most difficult for me to recognize because the ego was so strong. The identity with the body, with myself as a personality were so ingrained, so repeatedly ingrained in experience before I developed any wisdom. So that was anatta. And then as I began to realize the ultimate nature is awareness, seen is recognized through awareness, through conscious awareness here and now, that's not self-conscious. There's no suffering in conscious awareness. It's not impermanent, it's not anicca. It's here and now. And that must be what we mean by God, ultimately, or Allah, or all religions pointing at that which cannot be named, really. How do you describe, when the Buddha was enlightened, all he could do when as the story goes, he was after his enlightenment, he was heading towards Varanasi from Bodh Gaya to meet his friends, 5 friends, and on the way he met an ascetic who stopped him and said, you're so radiant, look so happy, so blissful. What have you discovered? And the Buddha said, I'm the all-enlightened Buddha. And the ascetic looked at him in disbelief and walked away. So that was actually his first sermon. So out of wisdom, when he went his 5 friends in Varanasi, he didn't say that. He said, there's suffering, there are the causes of suffering, there's the end of suffering and the way of non-suffering. So that's really good news, just those 4 noble truths. So I'll stop here and the rest is up to you now.